in sourcing, conceptualization, analyzing of investment opportunities. He worked for Portman's Shanghai office, and all of us who have been in Georgia for a long time have seen Portman Holdings grow by leaps and bounds in Asia and leaving behind an impressive footprint. He has also worked for Westwind Capital Partners on the asset management side and was involved in the management of a 2.5 billion Class A retail portfolio. Graduated cum laude with a BBA in finance from the University of Georgia. We're glad to have you. The second panelist, and I just met her, so I want to do justice to her. She's currently in Plano, Texas. She's the head of human resource for Huawei Technologies. She has 20 years of experience in human resource, previous experience with the King Center in our hometown, 2 years with Huawei. The third panelist is Phil Brigg, a senior global analyst, global advisor with the United Foundations out of Washington, D.C., specialized in global health and mobile technology and workforce capacity, and he'll tell us more about that, and task shifting, which I think is an important component of human resource management. We then have Ms. Lucy Liu, who is a well-known, very practiced business immigration attorney with the firm of Lucy Liu and Associates, and they fulfill an essential function in the oiling of the global workforce machine. So it will be interesting to get the regulatory perspective. And then finally, last but not least, a very experienced person, Ms. Lucy Neely, Division Vice President for Human Resources of ADP. By the way, the panel, I believe, is sponsored by your company, so thank you for that. So I would ask each of the panelists, I think we have about, correct me if I'm wrong, 11? No, 11 o'clock, so it's not, 11:15, hey, that's good. So maybe about 10 minutes each, and then we open it up for questions and answers. And we have a mic to go around, so don't forget about that. You can either speak, you're mic'd up, right? So you can either speak from where you are, or you can come here, whatever suits you best.
Quite comfortable.
Okay, great, Charles. The floor is yours.
All right, great. Well, many thanks to Kennesaw State University for having us here. I'm very happy to be here. We're looking forward to a growing relationship with such a fine institution. My name is Charles Pinkham. I work with Portman Holdings. We are a global real estate investment, development, and management firm. We started out primarily as a design firm in the 50s, and that quickly grew into a development firm as well. Our chairman, John Portman Jr., realized pretty quickly that if he were to secure the land and all the financing for the deals, then he knew for certain who would be the architect of those deals. So that led him to start securing those deals. Our first primary development was the Trade Marts in downtown Atlanta. We have since developed over 20 million square feet over 14 city blocks, which is now Peachtree Center, which any Atlanta locals are probably well familiar with. So we took this mixed-use development out to San Francisco, this model of San Francisco, built in Embarcadero Center. We did similar developments in New York City with the New York Marriott Marquis, and eventually moved into the global markets. This started in China, and since we now have, we're headquartered here. We have an office in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Seoul, and Mumbai. So though we are a relatively small firm, we are very much a global firm. Most of my personal experience is in China, so that's really the route that I'm going to take, as I can speak most effectively to that. So we actually entered the China market about 30 years ago. And this started out really as just two Americans trying to enter the market. And as we all know, about 30 years ago, the China market was not open to international investment. So it took a lot of persistence. But eventually, we did grow the relationships necessary to enter the market. And again, at the time, managing that workforce was pretty simple because it was just us. But over the next, say, 10 to 15 years, we started to expand that workforce to, we had the expatriates at the senior level, but we started to include locals, primarily bilingual locals, working for those expats. And then over approximately the past decade, we've moved much more towards that local talent. As the atmosphere of investment over there has become much more sophisticated, there's been a need to really embrace the Eastern cultures as opposed to trying to impose our Western way of doing business on them. And in fact, now in our India and China offices, the workforce there is 100% local. So, managing a global workforce today, in my opinion, what I'd like to focus on is primarily communication and embracing cultures. Because in my opinion, those two things are vital to making sure that you effectively do business in global markets. Now, I do not necessarily manage a massive global workforce. My CEO does. However, I do manage a small workforce in our India and China offices, but more importantly, I have recently been managed as part of that global workforce. I was in our Shanghai office as an expat in 2007 and 2008, so I'm going to bring a little bit of a different perspective to this panel of not just managing, but also being managed. So I think that probably the most important thing that you can do, or certainly one of the two most important things to keep in mind as people are managing individuals in other offices, is to make sure that those other offices do not feel isolated. And that's regardless of how small they are, but also of how that applies to larger offices as well. A lot of times, if you have a very large office internationally, you see them as self-sustaining. And that's very true in a lot of ways, but it's very important that there is a lot of communication back and forth. You don't want them to feel like they're on an island, because it's just human nature for everybody to have a sense of belonging. They want to feel like they're part of the group. So with the modern technology that we have now, we can really take advantage of that to enhance communication. But it's also important not to simply rely on that modern technology, specifically email. A lot of people, and my generation is probably the most guilty of this, is that instead of picking up the phone, we'll just rely on email. And we will assume that what we're communicating comes across. And I'm sure that we have all been in a situation where you send an email, you get a reply, and it has nothing to do with what you intended to communicate. And it's especially true in the English language because there's so many words that have so many meanings. Now, imagine if English is your second language, or perhaps even your third language. A lot of that communication is lost in that email. So a way to maintain this communication is really to pick up the phone. It is to have video conferencing. It is to travel and do as much face-to-face as you possibly can. And a lot of that is not cost-effective. Travel is expensive, whether it's us going there or bringing them here. But it's very important to communicate as much as we possibly can. And it's also important that this doesn't simply happen at the senior levels. This isn't just CEOs reporting to managing directors, and then the managing directors sending the information down the organizational chart. It's also analysts talking to analysts, analysts sharing models, sharing techniques. And so you have this peer-to-peer communication, not just at the top, but all the way down through the organizational chart. And when you have that sense of belonging, and when you have that connection, it just provides for a much more cohesive unit. So how do you get business done? Well, in the Western world, we have a tendency to try and do deals with people, make business happen, and then out of those deals, relationships will come about. In China, it's actually the exact inverse. There's a sense of trust that has to be formed first. So it's very important to cultivate that relationship, and then if you're fortunate, the business will come out of that. So it's very important for us in the Western world trying to work in the Eastern world to manage our expats to really try and work that way, but also understand and allow our locals to work as they know how. Because at the end of the day, the locals you have in the office are the experts in the culture, and you have to trust that. You can't simply try and impose what you would like to upon them. So how do you best communicate with your employees? In China specifically, there's a very important thing that they refer to as face. Face is an essential component of the Chinese national psyche, and it's a mark of personal integrity. So when you're communicating with your employees, if it's something that you want them to improve on, for example, it's important that that communication is isolated to that individual. It's not done over a conference call. It's not done in the dreaded reply all email. It's focused to that individual, so there's no shame brought about them amongst their peers. Now, on the flip side, if there's praise that's warranted, it's very important that you scream it from the mountaintops. Because if you simply give praise to that individual, it's not something that they're going to feel that they can go freely to share with everybody. But if they just keep it to themselves, it's not something that they have been able to share with everybody. So it's important that you push that within your communication. So the important thing, as far as I'm concerned, from my observations of managing and both being managed, is that it's important to make sure they have a sense of belonging, and it's important to communicate, and that we don't simply work in silos, but we work as one cohesive unit. Though we may have different strategies, we're effectively one group working towards a goal of smart real estate investment. Thank you.
Charles. The next